Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Jewellers Academy podcast. My name's Elin, and I'm a jewellery designer, maker, and tutor based in beautiful Bristol. And this week on the podcast, I'm joined by Naomi Lake.
Hello.
Naomi is a makeup artist and hairstylist, model, and creative director, as well as a freelance beauty and wellness writer. She's worked with household names like Nike, L'Oreal, Primark, and Lee Stafford, and jewellery brands such as Lauren Lewis Cole, Rock and Raw, Sia Taylor, and Joma Jewellery. So what are we talking about this week? Well, for all of us jewellers that sell our work online, we know how important it is to have those high quality images. It can be really hard for customers to understand the size or the scale of a piece if they can't physically pick it up. And so obviously good photos are the next best thing. So if you don't have the time or the budget to pull together a professional shoot, don't worry. Today, we're going to look at how you can style a DIY photo shoot, where to start, how to create a cohesive look on a budget. Also, some tips for outsourcing and working with a creative team if that's something that you might be looking to do. So I've done both of those things. I've worked with a professional team, including Naomi, and I've also done some images myself. But I think in retrospect, I realised that I wish I'd thought maybe a little bit more about the images I did myself. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money, but with some careful guidance and a bit of planning, you can get some fantastic photos that you'll use again and again. So welcome, Naomi.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your business?
So I've been a freelance makeup artist for 10 years in December, but I've been a makeup artist for a lot longer because, as we know, you have to do that juggling period before you can get to being freelance. So it will be, I think, about 15 years. Oh no, wait, I'm older than that. 16. Yeah, 16 years this year. And in that time, my goodness, like my focus on my business has changed so much. So when I first got into the industry, I was like, oh, I want to do film, I want to do special effects, I want to do like really gory, crazy stuff. And then I got really interested in fashion, and I actually cut my teeth doing a lot of music videos as well. So and music videos for like metal bands, and guys do not like wearing makeup, so it taught me to be really quick and have a really light touch because they don't want to be in the chair very long and they don't want to look like they're wearing anything. So then that somehow kind of fed into working with sports and fitness brands, so Nike, Adidas, Reebok, again for that light touch of we're not wearing anything, because I was working with the side of the companies that were like full fitness equipment rather than apparel. So they'd be like on a treadmill for most of the day. And I'd be there like, wow. And then since then, moving to Bristol, I've worked with so many independent designers and makers, and it's been amazing, and I absolutely love it. And then also in that time, have moved over into working, maybe about half of my business is bridal now, which I absolutely love. It's such an honour to be there on someone's day and help them feel comfortable, and for them to delegate something to make their day less stressful.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that sounds fantastic. So, if we're thinking about doing a jewelry photo shoot, where would you start? I mean, it can feel like quite an overwhelming thing, I think, for a jeweler who potentially doesn't have experience of doing something like that. Is it best to start with a theme or an idea, or do you just kind of let it grow organically?
I think for everyone, it's going to have a different course. So it's in the same way that I always say that I'm like, on starting my business as a makeup artist, I trained as something as a hobby because I kind of fell out of what I was doing at uni, and all of a sudden was like, oh God, what do I like? What do I want to do? And then, you go into something and you go, oh, I'm really enjoying this. And then you go, oh, actually, I'm really enjoying this. Let's, start a business. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh God, I need to do a tax return. And like, I need to, how do I market myself? So I know that for a lot of people, that aspect, the bit that you enjoy probably isn't necessarily the marketing side of it.
Absolutely.
And that aspect of the creativity, like your creativity may potentially be falling directly into creating your products in the first place. So I know that with every jewelry client and maker that I've worked with, there's a different process, and some people have a really strong view of like what they want their final images to look like.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, it's kind of more organically come from like the color or the texture that's within it, or maybe there was something in the process that was an inspiration in the design process that they want to kind of pull into the imagery, whether that's like a location or some kind of feeling in that way. And I think if you're, you know, say for this instance, if we're working with a team, creating a mood board so that you can get those ideas across, it was probably the most important and most influential way to be able to do that. So I always say with clients, it's like images are so important because that's how I can see inside your head. So when I'm like, I'm trying to get in your brain and like see what you want. And even if you're not entirely sure what that is, there's various different elements that you can pull in that I'll be able to look at and be like, right, okay, we're thinking of these tones, we're thinking of this texture, we're thinking of this overall look. And then those images open a conversation of how we're going to get to the final product from the initial designs of whatever your collection is, whether it's, just necklaces or just earrings, or, a full collection of various different pieces,
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that probably that feels more manageable in a sense, doesn't it? That you don't have to start with like a great big concept that this is what the photo shoot is going to look like, or this is where it's going to be. You can very much start picking out colors or themes or inspiration. So for somebody who's, as I say, who's kind of starting, they want to pull a quick shoot together themselves. They're going to maybe take the photos themselves on a friend or something. Where would you recommend, like, where do you go to search for inspiration, or how would you start pulling a mood board together?
Pinterest is such an incredible tool. And I mean, like, my goodness, like when I first started doing my job, Pinterest didn't even exist. You'd be like trawling through magazines, and you'd be probably looking at Tumblr. Do you remember Tumblr?
Yeah, days.
So, I mean, it's an incredible tool that you can use to really pull things together, and the fact that it will suggest other things that are kind of like what you're looking at. And I think you can upload your own stuff onto there as well, so you can have your own products on there, so it will kind of pull that in. Maybe it's some kind of AI thing, I'm not quite sure, but it's a really, really clever tool, and it can be collaborative as well. So if you are working with somebody else on a very collaborative basis, bringing your first shoot together, then they can pull ideas into it as well that might be helpful to bring that all together.
Yeah, that sounds like a great place to start. I think Pinterest is it's easy to kind of go down a bit of a hole with it, isn't it? But actually have to remind ourselves it is so useful for being able to kind of pull together some of those visual things. And I think, for most jewelers, absolutely, of course, that's their thing. They are it's all about the visuals. So yeah, that sounds great. So I suppose thinking more practically about setting up a shoot, what are the sort of things that we need to think about? I mean, I'm sort of thinking like, the model and the photographer and the location, like what are the key elements to get pinned down there?
So once you've got, I think starting with, someone who's going to take the photos for you, whether that's yourself or a friend or someone new that you're working with, I think finding a photographer that really fits your ideal style is important. I mean, I've just done a shoot with a friend who's starting a jewellery business, and it's literally her very first shoot, and my partner was taking photos for her. He works in TV, but also, he does photography for himself as a hobby.
Yeah.
And she was like, can he do it? And I was like, yeah, but just have expectations that it's not going to be like, yes. He's a wonderful photographer, but we want to think about what you want from it. So what style? So I was saying, think of the overall feel. Like, do you want it to be quite like clean? Do you want it to be quite moody, quite modern, a little bit more kind of like ethereal? So you're finding a photographer who either can flex a little bit to working towards the style that you want to create, if you're on a really small budget and you're limited to people who maybe can like jump in and help you out on a shoot, or look for a photographer who is basically like nailing the imagery that you want. And then the same for makeup as well. You want someone who, I mean, so when I was building a portfolio, I always used to say you need to shoot what you want to shoot. So, when I wanted to move over into more beauty photography, and there was a time as well where I was like, I really want to be working with more jewelry brands. So I set up some collaborative shoots with a few friends to be like, let's focus on jewelry, let's focus on makeup, and then when that imagery is there, that's when you get those clients.
Yes, of
Um,
course.
there's a little insight into how it works from this side of things. But yeah, so finding the team that really fits your vibe, fits your brand, and then when it comes to a model, it's someone who you want to kind of like toe the line between a model being aspirational, I think, but then also feeling like someone who your intended audience for your brand really vibes with. You
Mm.
don't want it to be um, too out of, if you're oh, I don't know, I can't even think of an example now, but say, different brands have different target audience, and if
Mm.
you're shooting with someone who does not look like your target audience, or is really really far away from it, then your customer isn't going to really connect with the images.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point as well. And maybe this is another bit for us to talk about. But I think something that I learned for sure was that actually there's sort of different sorts of images. So that you might have something very eye catching that's maybe got your kind of ultimate statement piece on, whether it's a necklace or a pair of earrings or something, and maybe that's something that appears in your visuals. So maybe it's on a postcard or on a business card or a board that you've got at a market or something. But actually, you also need images that are going to sell the jewelry. It's not just about those kind of maybe more editorial looking images, which can be fantastic and incredibly creative, but they're not necessarily the things that sell the jewelry. And as you say, if the person that is wearing the jewelry is, I don't know, 20 years younger than your target audience, are those images going to really resonate with your target audience? I think that's a really interesting thing to think about.
But also working with a diverse range of models as
Mm.
well. You don't, I mean, unless you're very particular in knowing exactly who your target is, maybe let's say, I don't want to name names, but there's like a few brands, maybe like the waterproof jewelry, I think,
Mm-hmm.
has for a lot of brands is very much targeted kind of like a Gen Z, like younger millennial kind of
Yeah.
person who's their person who's going to be purchasing. Um, but yeah, different brands will have a different target market, and I think that really knowing who your target audience is, but also still keeping a little bit of diversity within your models in that, I think would probably be the best way to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
and like you said, the different kinds of imagery that you're going to need. So flat lay is really important. You don't even need a model for that. And that's a way of showcasing the detail on your pieces. But
Mm.
then, like you said, you want to be able to show to your customer like the size of a piece. It's sort of, say this necklace, for example, that I'm wearing. When
Yes.
I purchased this, I don't know if I actually saw it on a model. I just kind of fell in love with it and was like, I just want it. Whatever size it may
That's
be, I
that
just
happens
love
in
it.
jewelry.
Yeah, I just thought it was like, oh my god. But knowing the size of pieces, so that's where model imagery comes in really handy. But then also you want to still have details within that, so that's where your ecom stuff comes. So it will be like on someone's decolletage, or rings on hands and
Mm.
earrings on, but very close up in that.
Mhm.
And then you have your more editorial images where it's much more of a statement, and same for campaign. But I feel like campaign imagery is a little bit more different to editorial.
Mm.
Editorial is where you can play with other aspects, so that's where collaborations are really important. So I've reached out to you on a few occasions being like, oh Ellen, I'm doing this shoot, can I like borrow a few pieces? And make sure you trust someone when you do that. So thank
Yes.
you for trusting me, because
Yes.
it can
No, I
be
agree.
really scary sending stuff out. And I've done that with other brands, and we've had written contracts and things, and we've pre-arranged when the pieces are going to be going back, and I think actually they've arranged couriers that I've had to meet and things. So um, you want to make sure that if you are collaborating with people, that your items are safe, and that you like know where they're going and things like that. But then yeah, campaign imagery, that's your like more full image of a person experiencing and interacting with the product.
Mm. Okay, that's really interesting to sort of make that distinction, because I think, as I say, probably for lots of us jewelers, we're novices when it comes to this sort of stuff, and it's kind of working out what we need. I think something I found useful as well when I was sort of starting to think about model imagery was actually just having a look and seeing what other jewelers were doing, like having a sense of like some, what works and what doesn't. And that can be quite subjective, of course, but if you find some really interesting images that you think work, it's not about copying them, but I think it's about thinking about what elements you could use. So, this is successful because there's a close up on the ear, or it's a particular way that the model's standing, or, a way that the jewelry is displayed. So I think all of that stuff can kind of feed into the mood board, can't it, in terms of where you're taking your inspiration from.
Absolutely, for sure. And that's something I was going to say earlier, but then completely forgot. But when it comes to Pinterest, you can set up different boards. So you can be like, right, this is poses that I really like. I really like the way that the model is interacting with the piece in this image. And then you have that really creates like a feel for the movement within the imagery. And then you can create another board which may be like, I really like the style of photography in this, and it might be, you might have some flat lays in there because you might like the graininess of an image, or you might have some fashion stuff where you're like, I really like the way that this is lit. And then your mood board for your shoot isn't just going to be hair and makeup. There's different aspects that you're thinking about. So in actual fact, you've kind of got maybe like 3 mood boards where you're pulling ideas from, but those mood boards will go to each different person in effect. So like there's a mood board of pose for the imagery, there's a mood board of photography style for your photographer, and then there's a mood board of hair and makeup for your makeup artist. Or if you're doing that yourself, I think it's still important to separate those aspects because it helps you be really clear on what you're after and what you want out of the shoot.
Yeah, and I think that's a critical thing, isn't it? It's the clarity of sort of what you're doing. I know when I did I as I said at the start, I've done both, where I've worked with a professional team a couple of times, and I've also done it myself. And I think when I was doing it myself, I wasn't quite in the same headspace for some reason. I suppose it felt like the pressure was off a little bit. And I actually only realized as I was taking the photos and we were under quite a lot of time pressure, that it was like, oh, I don't really know, I haven't really thought about this actually. So yeah, having that stuff beforehand, that you're really clear, exactly as you say, about what you actually want from it, rather than just kind of blindly snapping some photos and hoping that they're going to turn out okay. I think that's really important.
Another thing that you can think about is that, for most brands, your each collection will have its own feel to it, but overall your brand is your brand and you have that identity. So if you've pulled together a shoot and all of a sudden you're like, oh god, I haven't thought of all these bits, look back at past mood boards that you've made, because the pose and the photography style, maybe the makeup, is still going to be like an identity for your brand. So these mood boards, they don't have to be fresh and new each time. That's putting so much pressure on yourself. Go back to old mood boards and pull things from that, and then add new bits in. It doesn't have to be fresh every time.
Yes, that's true. And you want some sort of coherence, don't you, between the kind of different elements? Because ultimately, particularly if you're selling online, all that stuff's going to sit alongside it. On your website, there's going to be different collections, there's going to be different images, and you want them to work well together as well. Okay, so what about location? Have you got any thoughts on, whether it's better to shoot inside, outside? Does jewelry look better under any particular light, or can we just go for whatever we want?
So the difference between a studio setting and a location setting is that you'll have way more control over a studio setting. You get to the day and it's England and it's raining, or it's Bristol and it's really overcast, because it's just so often overcast in Bristol, isn't it? But you have so much more control over a studio setting. And when I say studio setting, that doesn't have to be, oh, I've booked a studio. You need a blank wall and some good light. And if this is your first shoot and you've never done this before, a ring light off of Amazon. I hate that name. A ring light.
Independent retailer.
A lovely independent retailer. Just a blank wall with natural light and a reflector. They're so cheap to buy as well. I've even got a really tiny little one like that, which I use if I'm shooting in like product stuff for Insta. And those tiny little ones can be really helpful when you're doing shoots and just want to bounce a little light. But So when I say studio setting, it's like some of my favorite images that I've created with collaboratively with friends and models have actually just been me shoving all of my furniture out the way and shooting against a blank wall in my house.
Excellent. That feels quite manageable. That's
Oh
good.
yeah, absolutely.
And what about clothing? Because again, I feel like that's something that sort of maybe isn't sort of top of people's lists in terms of thinking about what the model might be wearing. I'm conscious that in most images, you're probably not going to get a huge amount of the clothing in, but I think it is also quite important to think about that, isn't it, ahead of time?
Yeah. So you want to think about how the clothing is going to interact with the pieces. So, if you're shooting earrings that are quite long and going to fall onto the shoulder a little bit more, you probably don't want to have like a high neckline.
Mm.
Um, I've got a high neckline on today, and I've got this over the top. Sometimes I worry that it's giving The Rock in the 90s, but you probably want to have a little bit of skin on show so that you're not losing the detail of a piece against clothing.
Mm.
And then you want to think about, are you shooting something that's really modern and really clean and you want really sleek lines, or are you shooting some pieces that are a little bit more soft, boho, ethereal, and then maybe you want some softer layered fabrics and
Mm.
things like that. And then with the colors, so like absolutely like 9 times out of 10 avoid stripes. So just keep if you're shooting something that is like, just keep it simple,
Yeah.
plain, and yeah, like more luxe fabrics, maybe like linens and cottons, something that's really crisp.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, I've definitely found. I mean, you can pick up some great things on places like Vinted and Depop, but I've definitely found that in the past I bought things for photo shoots. I think last time we did something, I had bought something from Vinted and it didn't fit, but actually it didn't really matter because I realized that when you were looking at the imagery, really all you needed was something that was over the model's kind of shoulder because she was turned to the side. So actually, even kind of draping some stuff, some fabric can work, even if you don't have a full-on outfit. I think, can't it?
Oh yeah, for sure. And think about the fact that for most of the time you're not going to be shooting the full body.
Mm.
So for comfort, your model can be rocking a pair of trackies with like a really nice top on top.
Yeah.
And also think about sleeves. So if you're shooting bracelets, you probably want to have a shorter sleeve so that you're not going to be like pulling it up constantly, and that the
Mhm.
clothing isn't interacting too much with the pieces.
Yeah, yeah, that's useful. Yeah, so definitely keep it simple if in doubt. I think, yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
think that works for all aspects really. Like if
yeah,
in doubt, don't try and overcomplicate the situation. And your first shoot, you don't have to do everything. The
yeah,
main thing is that you're creating imagery that fits your brand and showcases the products. You're not pulling together a multi-million pound De Beers campaign on the first time that you're
yeah,
trying to create some imagery.
absolutely. So, moving on to hair and makeup, any kind of thoughts on what works in particular for jewelry there? Again, is it just down to your own personal preference, or are there some guidelines that we can follow to kind of make sure it looks as good as it can?
So, say you've got someone doing their own makeup for you. You want to keep skin really fresh, I'd say. Make sure that there's no like harsh lines. If someone is popping some foundation on, make sure that it's really nicely blended, like down onto the neck, and like soft, like all soft. um, and then also remember that someone doing their makeup for day to day maybe isn't the best for photography.
Mm,
So like a lighter touch, I would say, is probably the best, especially when you're pulling in really close.
yeah.
And things to keep an eye on when you're shooting without a makeup artist is moisturized hands. Moisturized everything really.
Yeah.
And think about clean nails, and like hydrated cuticles, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then keep an eye out for like stray hair. I mean, my fringe today is getting all up in my face, so you want to make sure that I always think that every now and again you're gonna end up. It just happens, but that's what I'm there on a shoot for. Obviously, multiple things, but one of the things I'm always looking out for is hair. I always think I would hate for someone's favorite shot to be one that's ruined by hair being in the wrong place. I'm
Mhm.
always watching hair. Um, oh, sorry, my cat is scuttling around in the background over there. I don't know if you can hear that. Yeah, there's lots of things to look out for, which is why having a makeup artist is amazing. But I mean, my goodness, it, like, at the end of the day, not wanting to put myself down too much, but it is only hair and makeup. Anything's fixable, anything's changeable. So if you take a few shots and go, oh, actually, I'm not really thinking that's working, you just change it, and you can just adjust things.
I think that's a really important point, actually, isn't it? That you know, that's the joys of having shooting digitally rather than kind of, you know, on a film, is that you can be taking a few shots every time and then stopping and looking back and just having a think about, actually, does that work, or as you say, is there a stray hair that's over the piece that needs to be moved out the way, and then kind of tweaking accordingly. And I think it's you know, often, I mean, I've definitely found, even if it's just taking product shots of jewelry, you know, often you have to take tens, if not hundreds, to get a few really good images. You definitely need to put some time aside to kind of sift back and look at what works. But yeah, I think you're right. As long as you're doing that on the go as well, to make sure that, you know, if you have got a friend who's modelling for you or whatever, and you've got, you know, 2 hours to get it done in, that you're making the most use of time by making sure that everything's looking as good as it possibly can. So is there anything else we need to kind of keep an eye out for, if, you know, if we're doing it ourselves, say, and we haven't got someone on set who's looking at that sort of stuff? Is there anything else other than, like, making sure lots of moisture,
Yeah, so
moisturization,
moisture everywhere. Hydrated lips, hydrated hands and cuticles. Focus on skin. So if you think about, you know, all of the big jewelry houses, De Beers and Tiffany's and Cartier, all of their imagery is actually, you know, very light on makeup. There's not any kind of like defining eye or like really strong lip, unless they're maybe working with you know, a like an actress who's, you know, got like a, you know, a red Hollywood lip vibe going on. So keeping everything actually quite plain lets your jewelry speak for itself, and that also creates a simplicity when you're shooting without a makeup artist doing these things for you. And then, you know, things that are less likely to smudge, less likely to move. And actually, this has made me think, shooting inside for your first shoot can be really helpful, because you're not having to worry about the elements. Hair isn't moving around in the wind, and you can keep the light really controlled because it's not going behind a cloud and stuff like that. So I think, especially if we're thinking first ever shoot and working with a really small team, or maybe, you know, you've grabbed your friend who's going to model for you, and a friend with a camera is going to come in and take some photos, keep it really simple.
Yeah. Okay, that's useful to know. And so I suppose the other thing I was thinking about as we were talking is, you know, sometimes you, particularly if you're kind of using the images in different ways, you maybe want a slightly different look. So maybe it's a different top or hair slightly different. How do you manage that if you're, as I say, if you've just got, you know, a set amount of time to kind of work through? Would you recommend having a couple of different outfit changes, or what would be the best way to handle that?
So I think you want to make sure that everything's cohesive all the way through. And actually, a shoot that I was working on recently, my client was like, "Oh, can we just change this for, like, you know, the last couple of looks?" And I was saying to her, you know, bearing in mind how much time we have left, because we kind of run over in a couple of other bits where, you know, one piece had taken a little bit more time to light. I was like, let's just have a little quick think about how many images this will actually be in, and is it worthwhile changing the makeup, bearing in mind that it's going to take a little bit extra time out of our day, and then how cohesive is that going to be on the rest of your website? So I was like, these last pieces, do they sit separately? Do you want to have that distinction, that it's going to be like a different look, or is it actually more worthwhile spending more time shooting rather than changing the makeup and then having everything cohesive? And in all honesty, it's always difficult to bring that up with a client, because you're like, oh God, I don't want them to think that I'm like, I don't want to do it, or like, you know, trying to be controlling. But every now and again, you just have this little voice in your head that goes, oh, I'll just mention it just in case. And then in the end, she's like, do you know what? Yeah, I think that is right. Let's focus on getting the pieces shot and getting them lit well, and then also, because this was a new brand, yeah, she decided that actually changing the makeup would create too much of a distinction on those few pieces that actually didn't need to be there. That said, if you want to have a little bit of diversity across your imagery online, which, it is important as well. You don't want everything to be exactly the same, because,
Yeah.
think about the way that we shop and the way that we scroll through things online. Your eye gets drawn to different things, and you do want something to have a little bit of an eye catch to it. So changing an outfit can be really helpful, and it's also quick. That's
Yes.
another aspect. Changing hair and makeup can be swift, but also sometimes you aren't going to have that, 3.5 minute changeover of someone just throwing a different top on. It
Yeah.
does take a little bit longer. So you kind of want to counter that time into your day.
Okay, that's really useful. Thank you. So, thinking about makeup, how can we build a makeup look kind of around our brand identity as a jeweler?
So thinking about tones and texture, um, I've worked with clients that have, just gold or just silver, like, or maybe bronze, like high end pieces that might
Mhm.
have um, embedded jewels in there. Or I've worked with clients that have like polymer clays, and like composite concrete type things.
Mhm.
All of these have different textures and they have a different feel to it. So within that, you're thinking, right, okay, are we going with something that's going to feel a little bit more rustic? Are we going with something that's really clean and really minimal?
Yeah.
Um, are we working? So your brand identity is the gorgeous geometric shapes. How can we bring that into it? And that might be bringing some like earthy tones into the makeup. It might be a slick of color on the lip. It might be building a little bit of color into it that might pull out tones within jewels,
Mhm.
and within like any other color elements that might be in there. And we've said consistently throughout that we want to keep it simple.
Yeah.
However, you can bring your brand identity into that. You can play with color and texture in makeup that will pull and really accentuate elements that are in the jewelry that you've made. But keeping it simple is also, how do we do that together?
Yes.
So when we work together, we bring in little slicks of color, and that might be like a softened, blended, colored eyeliner along the lash line. It might be a strong graphic winged liner that pulls into some of the angles within the pieces.
Mm.
If I'm working with someone who has lots of color going on, I might pick out one of those colors to put on the eyes. Or if there's lots of different colors throughout the pieces, I might go, right, okay, let's pick out one color that will work with all of that so that we don't have to continually change the makeup.
Yeah, sure.
If I'm working with someone who has very rustic designs, then I might be really playing with like the more rustic color tones. And that's where it's like, a soft, like neutral eye in very natural tones. Or you might want something poppy and colourful to go along with really playful jewelry.
Yeah.
So you want, it's in the same way as, how would you pair an item of clothing with the jewelry that you have? We always want to keep it simple, but it still wants to be complementary. But
Yes.
you do always want to make sure that you're selling the makeup. Oh my God, wrong way around. You're not selling the makeup. You're selling the jewelry. So you want to make sure that that is what's going to shine through in the whole of the look. But at the same time, you can still build other elements around it. It's just a careful planning and conversation to have with your makeup artist, or when we were talking about clothing, the stylist, to make sure that it complements, it accentuates, but it doesn't overwhelm.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's not about detracting from the jewelry, but also I think, as you say, then it if you can do something like that, it does make it your own. It kind of gives it your own stamp a little more than
It,
than just a
it
sort of
helps.
generic look.
Yeah, and it helps to build a brand identity. So if you're just starting out, it's your very first shoot, I think keeping it simple is the best way to go, and have like, less things to think about. But when you are starting to create more identity within your imagery, then start playing with these things. But always keep at the back of your mind that you want your pieces to shine through as the most
Mm.
important element.
Mm.
And you absolutely do not want to be changing the makeup too regularly within a shoot, because you want to have that cohesion as you're looking through the website as well.
Yeah.
It's a very delicate balance, but with planning and with that shot list where you go, right, okay, maybe this part of the collection has more of these tones in it. This part of the collection is maybe a little bit more clean, a little bit more crisp. That's when you can pair pieces together to go, right, with this outfit, this is going to work. And with that outfit, we'll go for that kind of makeup. And then, with this part of the collection, let's play with, texture a little bit more within the clothing, or we'll play with a color on the lip or like a little bit on the eye. But from my point of view as a makeup artist, I want to make those changes really quick.
Yeah.
So I'll start in the morning with the most low-key makeup look and I'll build upon it. So I might start with very fresh face, but then, for the second look, I'll add a little bit of something to the eye. I might then whip that off, pare it back, and then do something that's more of like a lip. And as you go through, you're doing touch-ups on other areas, but you can change those little bits.
Yeah.
And that's what comes with experience, really, to know how to build a look and how to progress it throughout the day so that you are still, you're not taking time out of the day to do that.
Yeah.
But then matching all of these things with the pieces as well.
Yeah. Okay, that's really useful to know. Thank you. So moving on from the kind of DIY elements, more thinking about people that maybe would like to outsource this and, work with a professional team. What would you say the kind of advantages or even maybe disadvantages of working with a crew of professionals to do something like this?
Oh, so I mean, the advantages is delegation, isn't it? If you bring in people that you trust and that you are confident can just kind of, get on with what they're doing, it's less for you to think about, and you can then focus on the feel of the overall images when each of those other elements are coming in to create that. So much of our work when we're working in this area is collaborative, even if that is you and one other, you and one person shooting, you're still working together and have that dialogue as you're working to get the outcome that you want. So having a makeup artist there, having a stylist, with really big shoots, you'd have a stylist coming in and sorting out all the wardrobe. So they would be looking after things like, is that collar in the right place? Is that sleeve moved down a little bit too much? In the same way that I'm going, right, okay, I'm looking at shine. I'm looking at, is there hair in the wrong place? Does that lipstick need touching up? Have we changed the lighting to adjust to shoot a particular piece that maybe isn't catching the light so well? Do I need to adjust the makeup for that? And then obviously you've got your photographer and everything else. So in that respect, when you're working with that team, you're the creative director, and you've delegated all these things out. People are working on these things for you, so you don't have to focus on all of the individual little bits, and you can look at the images as a whole at the end when they're coming through and go, no, maybe we'll adjust this a little bit. Love it. And in those things as well, you'll probably have a schedule for the day and a shot list, and you can go through and tick that off and just make sure that everything that you want is there. And actually, having said that, that's important for any shoot. I've had clients before kind of just come with like a box of stuff they want to shoot, and they're kind of taking it out of the box and going, oh, we've shot that now. But actually, that may not be the most helpful if you want to create some imagery that's more campaigny and has like a few different pieces to it. So thinking about how you might want to combine pieces together in your images is really important too. And that's where a shot list would come in. So, we might be working through each product individually, but then there's a few like key shots that you want to get where, maybe the model's hand is up by her face, you're showing off a ring at the same time as a necklace, or you're showing off a necklace with like an earring or something like that. And that's where the shot list can come in to make sure that you do those combo shots at the same time as getting all the individual pieces as well.
So that makes sense.
So I think that having a team behind you means that you can really dial in and focus on those elements to make sure that nothing gets missed. Not saying that anything would when you're in a smaller team, but the pressure is on you to be all of these hats.
Yes. And I think, you touched on this earlier when we were talking, about sort of working with a team. But I think it's that, I think what I've found from experience is it's about, again, being really clear, if you are working with an external team, being really clear with everyone about what you want. I think the worst scenario you can have is that you've paid lots of money for people to come in and, use their kind of professional expertise, but you're sort of dithering around because you're not quite sure, and the photographer thinks one thing and the makeup artist thinks something else, and it doesn't feel cohesive. So I think there's definitely something to be said for being really clear when you're briefing people, isn't there? If you're bringing in people from outside.
They say if I'm working with bridal clients, I'll send things out to them beforehand, kind of like, this is what we'll do in a trial and this is what to expect. And also I send out a document that's like, this is how to prepare for it. So it's like, think about your hair, think about your makeup, think about how the two are going to go together with like the dress that you're wearing. Excuse me, thinking about so many pictures when you're looking at hair is actually just the back of the head. So I'm always saying, think about how you want your face to be framed by your hair. And actually in that document I say that sometimes the best way of finding how you want your hair to look from the front is actually looking in makeup images, because that's when you see like the front of the face. So that briefing and that preparation that I help my bridal clients through would be the same thing when you're working with a team. I can't really think of a time when someone's booked me and gone, oh yes, I'm doing a shoot today. And
Yes.
there's always that, sometimes we can have a pre-production meeting and we might grab everyone on a Zoom call and be like, so this is what the expectations are from this shoot, this is what we want to get out of it, and this is what we're hoping for. Sometimes that mood board will come via email beforehand. Sometimes it does happen on the day, and I've been doing this for 15 years, as you said. Like I can roll with that. Like I'm flexible and I work quickly, but not every makeup artist will have that. If they're like newer to the industry, or maybe. I think that's why it's so important to look at someone's makeup portfolio beforehand, because you want to make sure that their style is actually fitting with what you want. Because every now and again you might get booked to something and be like, oh, actually, like that's maybe like a little bit more like glam or heavy than I would normally do.
Yeah.
Which again I can do, but you want to make sure that the makeup artist that you're booking, the photographer that you're booking, your stylist even that you're booking, can do what you want. And that's where the briefing and the mood board comes into it. Like, honestly, imagery is so important with these things.
Yeah.
And like you said earlier, which is a really important a really important point, was we're not copying these things, we're using it as inspiration.
Yeah.
I absolutely can guarantee that Cartier job, that Tiffany's job that someone might get booked for, that I've worked on a Cartier presentation before. I was assisting a makeup artist who's absolutely amazing, Miria Comparetto. She's divine, absolutely incredible to work for. We had a mood board for that.
Yeah.
And it was a Cartier job. So, even these massive, massive brands are going to come in with so much imagery that they are pulling from. And that might be their own previous campaigns.
Yeah.
It might be other people's campaigns. We're not copying these things. It's inspiration. And that's, in the same way as, oh goodness, like if you're writing a book, you might find phrases and words and poetry in other books that you go, oh, I really like the way that they've worded this or described this. I like the feel of this. Everything is. It's very difficult these days to make something that's brand new. Like, no one's really reinventing the wheel at this point. And I think that's something to remember, because, I've had a few clients previously who've got really like caught up in the idea of like, oh, I don't want to copy other people. We're not copying, we're drawing inspiration, as long as you're not saying, I want this, just like that.
Yes.
But sometimes you do, if you just need to have a shot of a ring on someone's hand, again, we're not reinventing the wheel. It's very difficult to do something that's never been done before when you're doing something that's very particular and very simple in that way.
Yeah.
So I think take the pressure off yourself to be like, oh my god, no one's ever done this before.
Yes.
You don't need
it doesn't have to be brand new. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's really helpful. Yeah, it's. I think you're right. It's all about the visuals, which I mean is good news if you're a jeweler, because we are definitely all about the visuals. So if we were working with a professional team, I mean, I know this is an impossible question to answer really, but do you have any sense of what people would need to budget to kind of work with a photographer, a makeup artist, and maybe a professional model as well?
So, I mean, it will completely depend on who you're working with, and it will depend on the area. So, like, the amount that I would expect to be paid within London would be a higher rate
Sure.
than outside of London. And, that goes for the budgets that people have when they come to me and the expectations of different areas. So as an example, there's a company called the APA, it's the Associate Producers Association or something like that. I can never remember what the acronym is, but they have a document that shows what the recommended rates are for everybody, whether that's a stylist, makeup artist, photographer. So and also Beck too as well. You can download that and see what the expectations are. But then also, if I'm working with an independent brand, I personally would rather flex on my expected day rate because I really enjoy working with small brands.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the case for everybody, but if you go into something saying, I have this budget, how does this fit for you? There's been times where I've gone, oh, actually, do you know what? That is really quite low for the area, even if, I'm working within it. So I'll always say, maybe that's a little bit low for the area and also for what you're doing. However, there's the option of having, so there's something called a do and go. So as a makeup artist, I might get booked to come to location in the morning, do a model's hair and makeup, stay for like the first checks and then zip off.
Sure.
And that will mean that maybe like the model has to touch up powder or like really heavily powder before I go to help, make everything stay put. That can also be really helpful in a studio setting, actually. But then you'll be looking at hair and things, and then you won't have those changes. But yeah, I think when it comes to expectations of budgets, reach out to people and say, I have this, how does this work for you? And it may be that, a model or a makeup artist or a photographer goes, I can flex a little bit, or actually this might be a half day, or, we could do a full day, this, if it's a little bit. So it's just speaking to people and finding out, because, rates are a difficult one to kind of talk about, and this is why I'm not naming any numbers because this is going out to so many different people in so many different areas, and I wouldn't want anyone to be like, oh well, she said it was that. Rates are going to differ across the whole of the country, and they're also going to differ in people's length of time that they've been working, and if someone's got a very specific skill set in the fact that they I've got friends who only shoot supercars, and and another friend only shoots yachts interiors. So I wouldn't be going to him and being, oh, can you shoot these shoes for me for a day, and this is the rate that I have. He'd be like, it's not what I do. So everyone will have their niche, and there will be they'll have their prices, but just ask. I think is probably the best way of going into it. Say, I have this budget, how does this work for you? And if it doesn't work for them, people can say no.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's actually a really important point to remember, that just getting to know a few people, chatting to whether it's photographers, makeup artists, whatever, and just kind of opening the dialogue a bit, rather than just thinking, oh no, that's completely out of my price range. I mean, I definitely know photographers who will who take on maybe big commercial clients, but that means that they can be a bit more flexible with smaller indie brands, because it's the big clients that are paying lots of money. So yeah, I don't think anything's ever completely set in stone, and it's useful to know that there are some guidelines on sort of pay expectations that people can look at as well, just to kind of get a sense of what the budget.
I think one thing to be really careful of that will irk people, let's say, is saying, oh, it's a collaboration. It's a collaboration if everyone is coming into it and everyone is getting something out of it that they want. So if I'm doing a test shoot with a model, I will always say to them, what do you want out of this? Because they're building up that portfolio. I've been doing this 15 years and I still do test shoots now. It's a time where I can experiment and get to meet new people and play around with different techniques, test some new products, that sort of thing. But the main thing is that no one is using it for monetary gain.
Yeah.
It's very, very important. And, we've done shoots before where maybe like I've been using a makeup brand products, and they go, oh, can we share these images? And I will always direct those back to the photographer who owns the images in this,
Yes.
I should say. And then she can go, you can buy the images if you want to, but maybe we would prefer that you didn't share them on your social channels or use them on your website. Resharing something on Instagram is very different. On a story is very different to posting it on Insta as an image, or even using it on a website.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to someone saying, oh, I've got this collection, I'm looking to do a collaborative project, but you're going to be putting that on your website, you're using that as marketing and you're expecting monetary gain from that. It's not fair to turn around to everybody else and be like, oh yeah, can you work for free for me so that I can build up, this, my website and have this imagery. So I think that's one thing to be really careful of. The word collaboration does kind of get banded around a little bit too much in areas where it's not really a collaboration.
Yes, it's not
like
really appropriate.
if you're going into something saying, right, I've got this mood board, I've got this vision, I want this, I want that. It's like, well, where's the collaborative aspect if no one else can have their kind of say in it? But then do collaborations as well. You can it's very you are able to reach out to makeup artists and photographers saying, I really love your work. If you're shooting any test shoots, I'd love to send you some pieces to borrow. In the same way as I said that if I'm organizing something every now and again, I might reach out to designers and be like, could we borrow this? We'd love to feature it in the shoot that we're doing. It's not for any monetary gain. We're just kind of playing around with ideas. But that's how you can maybe get some more fashion images or some more diverse images that you could then put on your Instagram rather than on your main website selling your products, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've done that in the past where I've done it with you, and I've done it with a couple of people locally, and then also some stylists in London that I ended up sending some pieces to, who were working on a shoot. Again, as you say, bringing in sort of different clothing brands and jewelers and all sorts of things. But yeah, it was great to have those images that I never would have had that sort of image created if it had just been my own photo shoot. But it was really nice to have something a bit different, and as you say, it's something you can share on Instagram, which looks great. So that's definitely a good route to have a think about as well, I think, isn't it, to kind of supplement those kind of really important website images that we need to sell the jewellery. We also want some that are maybe a little bit aspirational or a little bit different from our normal style.
And in that aspect, say if a stylist gets in touch and says, oh, we love your pieces, I'm doing this shoot for XYZ magazine, and I'd love to pull a couple of pieces. Your imagery, other way around, your products are being shown in imagery that has a very different reach potentially to what you're doing. So those collaborative shoots are really important as well. It's it's getting your pieces known with a stylist, it's getting your pieces known with a photographer, and your images, oh my god, I keep saying images, sorry, your pieces are going to be shown in that magazine, which will then get shared on their Instagram. And so it's a way of kind of like pushing your products out, but in more of a kind of natural way than your own marketing. And then that's how you end up with like I said, that different style potentially to what your brand is, but it's still really important to have that imagery. Like the more imagery the better, really, isn't it? Like
exactly.
I don't think really anyone ever goes, oh yeah, no, I've got enough stuff to put on Instagram.
I've got too many photos for Instagram.
Yeah, I've never heard anyone say that.
All right, brilliant. Well, that's been so useful. I feel like we've covered lots of ground there, but like loads of really handy tips on kind of how we can get started on these things and the key things to look for. And I think it definitely resonates with me what you were saying about just really keeping things simple, particularly if it's going to be your first shoot, is that it doesn't actually need to be complicated. You can get some beautiful images just by some careful planning and keeping things as simple as possible.
There's one thing I just thought of there actually. So keeping things super, super simple. If you can't find anyone that even wants to be in front of the camera, think about non-rec imagery. So non-recognizable. It's basically just using someone's, like below the nose. So using someone's hands, using someone's, like neck, side of their neck, shoulders, ears, that sort of thing, just so that you can show off pieces without having to think about any makeup. There's so especially in I hate even saying that, but like lockdown, a lot of brands, when I wasn't able to go in legally and do people's makeup, they started shooting non-rec, which is like below the nose.
Mhm.
So you don't need to have a makeup artist there for that
Yes.
necessarily. Some brands, really, really big brands, I will be brought in to do non-rec imagery because we will still be looking at the hands, the shoulders,
Mm.
I'll still do makeup for non-rec imagery. The difference there is that basically they aren't paying for using the model's face. So the amount that you're paying the model is actually a lot different in that kind of
Ah,
imagery,
interesting. Yeah.
which is why I would still potentially be there for makeup, but you don't have to have it. If
Yes.
you're working on a really small budget, if your friend who's happy to take some pictures isn't confident in front of the camera,
Yeah.
you can do that non-rec imagery. And then that means that you have something to
Yes.
put on your website so that people can see the product on someone. But again, you're removing that pressure. And in that, maybe you'll have like a little bit of hair down to soften it, or actually you might want to scoop it all up out of the way.
Mm.
So that's just one more way of creating imagery that's really, really low pressure on you.
Yeah, that's really useful. Actually, I hadn't thought about that. But yeah, thank you. All right. Well, that's great. Thank you so much for joining me today, Naomi. It's been brilliant. Would you like to share where people can come and connect with you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have my Instagram, which is Naomi Lake MUA, Naomi Lake makeup artist. And then my website is naomi-lake.com. And there you can find all of the wonderful things that I've worked on over the years. And then, yeah, my Insta is a place where people can connect as well.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you so much. We'll add those to the show notes just in case you didn't catch it, so you can check them out later. And yeah, thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Bye.
Thank you for having me. Bye.